All broadcasting live from a shack on a hill in the Mossy Creek bottoms of Cane Creek, Arkansas. This is Lighting the Void. I'm your host, Joe Roop, and we're live on Fringe FM, KTLK Digital Broadcasting. It is December the 6th, Wednesday, a little after 10 o'clock on the East Coast, a little after 7 on the West Coast. Tonight, Jeff Harman is back. Jeff Harman, the man is back. We're going to talk a little esoteric, a little astrology, maybe some Vedic, maybe some gemology. Who knows? Who knows where the road will go tonight? The calling number, if we open up the phone lines, is 501-777-5631. Want to make sure that you're aware that tomorrow night, actually, Ryan Gable will be on. Not tonight, tomorrow night. Jeff's coming on tonight. Ryan will be on tomorrow night, and then we'll start this whole shoot match over again next week. So you didn't get your wires crossed. I did. But it's a blessing. I'm blessed. We're blessed here in the shack. We're warm, even though it's a little cool. We've had a few power outages, a few outages. That kind of thing happens in Arkansas. But we're still broadcasting live. Speaking of which, I am updating, thanks to your donations, I'm updating a few things. Nothing fancy, no new computers or no new big equipment, but just a little few things so we can upgrade this show to video. If you hadn't noticed, I think we uploaded like 14 or 15 backlogged episodes into the video archives because, man, I'm an old school radio and podcaster guy. Like, we didn't use video back in the day. You had to actually listen to Apple Podcasts, Google stuff. Everybody's on video now, so we got to do it. So we're going to be getting into all kinds of stuff. Music, radio, podcast, even gaming. God, it sounds like fun. All right, Jeff is here with us, Jeff Harman. Jeff Harman's a second-generation, world-renowned master astrologer and spiritual advisor with 47 years of experience. He uses ancient techniques, including classical Vedic, Naadi, Kabbalistic, and Astro-Location astrology, combined with decades of Vedic Planetary Gem prescription expertise to assist his clients, and he's been assisting the show for quite some time, telling us what's going on in the cosmics, guys. What's up, brother? Thanks for coming back on, Jeff.
Hey, Joe, thanks for having me.
I thought I lost you there for a minute. You scared me.
Oh, no, I'm right here.
So
I wouldn't leave you, Joe. Not at the beginning of a show, I wouldn't.
Yeah, just give me the awkward silence for a minute. Be like, all right, I'm just kidding. I'm here. So, yeah. So we had you on last time, and we were talking about all the big changes that we're going through, and I've noticed some weird. You know how they say, like in Hermeticism, as above, so below, as within, so without. You know what I've been noticing is the reflection of things in the media that kind of portray exactly what you're talking about, whether it's movies, TV shows, video games, the talk that's on everybody's mind. It's like an energy where we know that we're going through a change, and it's kind of reflected into society too. Does that make sense at all?
Oh, yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, when you really look at where we're at, you know, I've been saying for years, what affects us all is the mundane cycles. You know, a lot of people have said, oh, we're in the Aquarian age. And I really don't agree with that. I don't think we're in the Aquarian age. It doesn't seem like the Aquarian age to me. How about to you?
Not really.
Take a look around. We got bombs blobbing on both sides of the world. And it's pretty crazy. So I think we might hit that so-called quote unquote Aquarian age a couple hundred years from now, but and it may be a little closer to 230 something years from now, but I don't think it's right away. But the big cycles that I ran into years ago, which are very fascinating. This is very ancient astrology. No one knows exactly where it came from, but clearly when you start talking about the Enochian and the Keys of Enoch and the Enochian, books of Enoch, it's really interesting because clearly there was an ancient time when the ancient Greek and Hellenistic and Egyptian astrology referred to, even back then, the ancient cycles of the world. In fact, there's a good translation. I've got a couple of them actually. And this has been used with astrologers probably since maybe 300 BC is when the first document showed up about it. But it talks about the cycles of Saturn and Jupiter. And Saturn and Jupiter, they join every 20 years. Anyone who studies astrology is going to figure that out real quick. But they only join in very specific and special conditions. And those special conditions are when Jupiter and Saturn join in the first bound of Aries. When I say the word bound, that's the Egyptian bounds. And I don't know how Egyptian they are, but clearly the Egyptians put out a zodiac that is much different than the modern zodiac. And there's also a belief that Orphiga, which is the 13th sign, may be the center of the galactic center. So there's all kinds of theories about this. But the bottom line is when Jupiter and Saturn join in the very first 5-degree bound of Aries, this is called the Great Conjunction. And they actually said it all the way back to the flood of Noah. And they said that every 1,000 years, these rejoin. And then approximately every 240 to 250 years, they make what we call a mutation conjunction. Well, we had a great conjunction right at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the 1700s, which was the formation of this country. And I think it's safe to say the world really changed then. I mean, we went basically from horses and buggies and, all that, to steam engines, to electricity, to mass manufacturing, to this acceleration that is absolutely stunning when you look back, at least over the last couple of thousand years of human, evolution and existence. We really have taken off in this last couple hundred years. Well, the next mutation conjunction we just had was on the winter solstice of 2020. And if you look back and you say, well, why is the world so different right now? And it really is. I mean, it's almost like virtual insanity on steroids. Everything has changed. Now it's, throw your gas car off the cliff and buy an EV, buy an electronic vehicle or electric vehicle. And, everything is just completely changed since 2020. And I think the owners at the top of the pyramid knew this, and they ushered in, and I don't care what anybody tells me, I think they released COVID. And I think it was an engineered crisis that happened. And no one knows exactly who to blame. And nobody's taken the blame, that's for sure. And what's interesting about the whole thing is that was the mutation conjunction. And I believe also what was so powerful about 220 forward is the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So this was globally. It wasn't germane to any country. It was germane to humanity. And every time we see a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, that affects us globally as well. In fact, here's a good example. The president of this country, Woodrow Wilson at the time, basically handed over, and so did the Congress, our country to the bankers. And that was called the Federal Reserve Act. And that happened right next to a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And right after that, what do we have happen? Right around the corner, World War I, which rearranged the dynasties and power structures of the old order in Russia and Europe. And of course, we had a total change. And the next Saturn-Pluto conjunction was 38 years later, and they happen about every 38 to 40 years. In fact, Nixon took us off the gold standard not too far from one. So we had the confluence of both the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which is always destructive and coercive, combined with a 240-year Saturn-Jupiter conjunction since 220 forward. And look at where we're at. The last few years, if you look back in hindsight, everything has changed. I mean, you look around at all of our lives, the current administration, which I really don't believe is even Biden, because I don't think Biden can find his way in and out of a room without help. It's the owners and the people that are surrounding him. And clearly they're taking a wrecking ball to the middle class. Everyone is going broke. And that's fairly transparent when you look at they've increased the cost of energy so high, and they're thwarting the cost of energy so high that what we're seeing now globally is life in the middle class is really becoming compromised. So that's affected us all. And that's how I would answer. How does the astrology affect us all? We're really at what I would call a reactionary effect from these very powerful conjunctions that all happened in 2020. We're in a contraction effect. And we're going to get another one in 2028. That's the square. That's when Saturn and Pluto will square. And that's always another big change.
What would you say the worst kind of transits for an individual to have during this time, right? So, I mean, a lot of us are pretty adept in astrology now. I'm not adept, but we're not like you as adept,
people know about it. Yeah,
but we know about it. So I'm worried about, I mean, what planets should we really look at first to see, okay, how the energy is going to affect me as I go through with this, right?
Well, I got to tell you, when you look at each of us individually, when I do readings, one of the first things I look at is the Vedic astrology. You want to look at what they call dasha you're in. Now, dasha is a strange word that means time period. And that's based on the moon exact position when you were born. So the minute you're born, or I should say the second you draw breath, the clock of time starts, which there really is no time. But, we start in these bodies in the perception of reality called time. And what's interesting is the dashas are really powerful. And you can track where it is in your chart. You have to look at what we call the sidereal yogas. Now, in other words, what aspects of what house is it in, what signs it in. And then all of us will find that the first 90 days after birth equals the next 90 years. And this is profound stuff. It's almost like the Earth is a spaceship that we go into in these bodies. And the next 90 or 100 days equals the next 90 or 100 years. And that all reverses back out in time on each of our individual birth charts. And those are called primary directions and secondary progressions. And they're astounding. And nobody's going to have the exact same conditions because depending on where you're born, the eastern horizon, the midheaven, the descendant, and the IC are all going to be placed in some sign and juxtaposed between all the planets. And what's interesting is when you look at these progressions, like here's a good example. I know everybody either loves him or hates him, but Trump won the presidency exactly when the primary directed sun crossed his ascendant. John F. Kennedy was killed right when he had a primary direction of Mars in the 8th house. So this, I could go on and on. In fact, Trump lost, or you could say that whatever happened on that election in 2020, I won't get into that, was exactly when Uranus by primary direction went over his ascendant. And this is fascinating stuff because I remember in 1970, it was probably about 76 or 77, I had a primary directed Mars conjuncting Mercury. Well, what happened to me? Well, I planted into the front of a 1972 station wagon at about 50-something miles an hour because the lady pulled out in front of me and then saw me, and I smashed right into the front of the car. And the next thing I know, I woke up. So these primary in the hospital with, stitches in my head and a cast on my leg. And these things are amazing. So if people track the solar arcs or primary directions and secondary progressions, you really can see the unfoldment of time and energy in your birth chart. And now in transits, everybody loves, and I always love to look at Saturn. Saturn is the hour hand on the clock of life. Jupiter is the minute hand, and Mars is the second hand in analogy. Mars always shows where your energy is. It goes around the chart every 2 years. Jupiter goes around your chart about every 12 years. And Saturn goes around your chart about every 28 and a half to 29 years. Some people round it to 30, but it's about 29 years. So the big ones are Saturn returns. I always say life is a 3-act stage play. Act 1 is when you're swatted on the rear end of the delivery room or whatever else they do to you. And the first act ends at 28 years old to 29 years old. Then you go into Act 2 from 28 to 29 all the way up to 58. It's usually about 58 and a half, 59. That's your second Saturn return. And that ends Act 2 and begins Act 3. Act 3 will end in your mid 80s. Usually around 84 to 86 years old. And after that, I call it the reprise of the exit music. But that's the cycles of Saturn. And in between there,
that's fun.
Yeah, it's just like a movie. It really is. It kind of is. I believe we're avatars. I really do.
Right.
We are dumbed down, and our conscious minds are actually blocked for the most part from the upper portions of the spirit and psyche and soul. It really is. Our lower conscious mind in the Aramaic and Hebrew is known as nefesh, which is like silly putty. It forms in the womb. It's not us. I call it the keyboard, the mouse, and the screen, or if you like, the steering wheel, the gas pedal, and the brakes. And it's the interface between us, you could say, and our five senses in this physical world. And the body is miraculous. I mean, none of us think about that when we're in our young ages. But when we start getting older, we start realizing how precious health and how precious these bodies are. If you're healthy and if you're functional, you're already rich, because wealth is truly health, in my opinion. You can have all the money you want. If you don't have your health, you're done. And I know I have people who I work with who are very wealthy, and they get really sick. And I've heard them say, I give every dime I have and every bit of power I have to get my health back.
I've heard that before too. I would give it all away to feel healthy again. Yeah.
There's nothing more precious than our bodies and health while we're in these lives.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. So I like what you said about the nefesh and the sun and the our souls and stuff like that. So I learned a lot about this through studying the Kabbalah, right? The nefesh, the neshama.
Yeah. That's one place. Yeah.
All of that stuff. And I think there's something real about that for sure. So here's a question that I would ask you, like astrologically speaking, if people are, let's say they're depressed, they're down and out, maybe they feel hopeless. We could go across a bunch of different negative feelings, but from what I've done, I guess, experienced with the people I've talked to, Jeff, this is what they tell me, right? They're either lost, crazy, don't relate to people, whatever. And, I do ask people, I'm like, well, do you know your birth chart? Well, I'm a Pisces or I'm a this or that. And my moon sign, I'm like, no, do you like it? They even have apps now that will tell you at least your kind of like your basic aspects and stuff. Like, do you know this?
Oh yeah. Anybody can jump online and look at their aspects. Yeah.
And so what a lot of people have told me that are skeptics about it is they say, well, you could say that thing that it's describing there to 3 or 4 different people and they would all say, yeah, that's me or whatever. What do you say to that?
Well, I think modern astrology is love, light, and cluelessness. I really do. Here, I'm going to put something on the screen. If you can give me permission to share, then if you want to put this on your stream, you can. I'll put up some of my favorite diagrams. I use these diagrams a lot.
Sure, yeah. But you understand what I'm saying, right? Like,
oh yeah,
they don't look at the intricacies of it too much.
Well, astrology has really fallen out of grace, and it really has. And it really happened probably in the late 1600s. Joseph Blagrave, William Lilly, Nicholas Culpeper, and Gadbury, these were all of kind of the final, what I call cabooses to the train of astrology as it faded away into history. Because from the 1700s forward, and isn't this interesting? What did we find? That was the age of reason, right? All of a sudden, science, the age of science, the age of reason. And of course, the Industrial Revolution. And then it was bookended by Darwinism, right? So all of this, again, was precipitated by the Saturn-Jupiter major conjunction that we hadn't had in 1,000 years that happened in the 1700s. This is very powerful. You see how it affected the world? Prior to that, astrology was quite profound. It was used in medical astrology. You didn't have SATCOM. You didn't have cell phones. If you wanted to know where your ship was, you went to the local astrologer down at the wharf, and you would say, hey, my ship hasn't shown up for 3 weeks and went to the Far East, or 3 months, or whatever it would be, probably more like 3 or 4 months. And they would cast a chart, an interrogation chart, to see when, if the ship was ever coming back, if it was scuttled at sea, or if it was just running late. And how they did that, in fact, that's a technique that I use constantly, and most modern astrologers should learn it. Many people today call it horary, but what its ancient name was interrogation. And if it's just like it sounds, you're interrogating. Now, this proves, in my opinion, that the universe is an interactive consciousness. We are not our astrology. Our souls are created hundreds and hundreds of dimensions above where the celestial influences are. If anybody's studied a little bit about the Kabbalah, you probably have heard of something called the Sefer Yetzirah. That's a strange title, meaning the book of formation. See, Yetzirah in Aramaic and Hebrew means formation, and Sefer means book. So the Sefer Yetzirah explains this is where spirit starts going into matter. And this whole realm is spirit manifested into matter. See, when you look at the upper worlds, they say there's 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions in 2 major spiritual worlds above astrology. And that's where our souls are believed to be created. And I think it's true. And what's interesting is there's different bays of souls as you go down into each of these worlds. They have hierarchies. They're like trees of life within them. They have the 10 Sephirotic, what they call Sephirotes, which is a strange word that means spiritual containment density vessels as you go down. And when you get into the Yetziratic world, now you're into the molecular world. This is where we see the amino acids and molecules, atoms and protons, and all these very complex combinations of energies, some of which we don't even understand yet. And then you get into the final 49 dimensions. And they actually say there's 49 parallel universes and 49 subdimensions. And I don't know about you, Joe, but that's beyond my comprehension. That's exceedingly complex. And then you have the astral planes, which is the final 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions between the celestial influences in the physical worlds. And it's kind of like you could say, a bracket or surrogate into this physical world. The earth is the soul cauldron. It is literally where spirit becomes manifest. And I think the astrology is the transmitters between the souls and the physicality. That's why this whole modern concept of, oh, you're a Pisces or an Aries, you could line up every Pisces, every Capricorn, every Aries, and any sun sign side by side, and there isn't a single one of them the same. I defy anyone to show me that. When you look at Vedic astrology and Naadi astrology and the ancient traditional techniques, if it's true, and I believe it is, that we are rocketing around a central sun, and even to the flat earthers, the model still holds. And the Vedic ancient texts actually talk about a 250 million year galactic cycle. I mean, this is really deep stuff. How in the hell could you ever get a chart that's the same, even if someone's born seconds apart? When you look at all the fixed stars that are immeasurable in astrology, everybody knows their rising sign, they know their moon and their sun, the big 3, the sun, the moon, and the ascendant, right?
Yeah, it's usually sun, moon, rising, and Venus. That's what everybody focuses on most of the time. Yeah,
sun, moon, rising, and the moon, yeah, and the ascendant, yeah. Well, you can look at Venus too if you're looking at your love life, but and your pleasures, but absolutely not us. This is clearly what I love is the fixed stars. And lost to modern astrology is every single degree of the zodiac is ruled by very ancient descriptions of fixed stars. And each one of us will have that on the ascendant. And what's interesting is somebody will say, yeah, but what if two people are born at the same time? They got the same star? Not necessarily. When you start moving 60 miles east, west, north, or south, you've altered the trajectory angle. These are called parans. I mean, take a surveyor and go move something 300 yards out, and you'll see that is huge in the surveyor's purview. So think about the Earth and an individual being born, their soul being tied to the body at first breath, and now go light years out there. I mean, the slightest movement, you've got the Earth rotating, plus you've got the orbit, plus you've got the solar system moving around the central sun at just less than 500 million miles an hour. It's immeasurable, the infinite possibilities. It's a reality machine. It truly is. And I think it's not even fully measurable by the tools we have.
So let's take my generation, for example. My generation, and I don't mean like Generation X or anything like that, but my generation of people, within the few years of my life, I don't know the exacts of it, but a lot of us have Pluto and Libra. And so I've noticed a lot of my friends have issues with injustice, feeling like they can connect to people, things like that. And I've wondered, well, Pluto is this outward planet of transformation, like deep transformation, right? So would that say, if you looked at it from a Kabbalistic point of view, and I'm just as like an assuming question, if I looked at my chart and I said, well, I got Pluto and Libra, does that mean that I transform or alchemize through Libra energy over my life? Or does that mean something completely different?
Well, I think every placement of the both tropical and sidereal, see, that's another element too that you enter into, is Western astrologers use a tropical zodiac.
Right.
Vedic astrologers use a sidereal. There's about a 24-degree difference between them, a little over that, actually.
Which can be pretty big for,
That's really big. I mean, you'll likely find that you're not the same sun sign in Vedic astrology as you are in tropical. And what I find is there's divisional camps. Like right now, a lot of people are saying, well, I don't believe the tropical anymore. I only look at the Vedic. I have actually come to the conclusion that both are really accurate. You cannot deny the seasons. You cannot deny the solstices and equinoctial points. They're exceedingly powerful. I mean, the spring equinox, the birdies are chirping, the flowers are starting to bloom, and, the animals are all mating, and it's just springtime. So, and then the summer solstice, you've got the sun, the days are the longest. So the tropical zodiac seems to act almost like a Russian babushka doll as the inner, or I would actually say it's the outer layer, and the sidereal might be the inner layer.
Interesting.
And
okay.
What's fascinating is if you look at the two techniques and keep them separate, they're actually right on. Because I've found that people who have progressions and the secondary progressed moon is one of your most powerful timers. See, when we're all born, how long does it take the moon to go around the Earth? About 27 and a half days, right? Almost 28 and a half to catch back up where it is. Well, guess what? If a day equals a year, every single individual drawing breath is going to have the moon cycle around their life by the time they're 28 and a half to 29. Well, what is that? Your first Saturn return.
Right. That's interesting.
So it'll go back to where it is. Now, here's the cool thing about that. I have invariably found that when your progressed moon joins your 10th house cusp, which is your career house, you're up to bat. That's the first thing I look at every morning when I do readings. I have a sheet. I list out all your progressions, all your primary directions. The first thing I'm looking at is doshas and secondary progressed moon.
Wait, now are you talking Western or Eastern here when you look at, so when you
both, I look at both. I use both systems. I have a whole system I go through in Vedic and Naadi astrology, which are both different. And then I have another whole section that I go through looking at all your tropical transits, progressions, and directions.
Yeah, you
And
told
then I
me
look
that
at your
before.
location. Yeah.
This was when I was trying to learn from you before.
You
said
won't get accuracy if you don't.
Western, you told me, well, I really like the Western transits, is what you told me, or the tropical
They're right
transits.
on. They're right on. I don't care what anybody says. They're right on. And I also find if you apply the techniques in Naadi astrology, so are the sidereal. It's like if you're going to work on an engine and the engine has metrics, well, use a metric tool set. If you're going to work on an engine that's all SAE, well, then you better use the inches and feet and elbows, right? So I look at it from both perspectives. And I actually have programs set up on my computer where I do strictly the Vedic astrology in a very well set up Vedic system. Yeah, and I look at all the divisional charts and all the progressions. And then when I get done with that, filling it all out, then I go look at all the cycles in the tropical systems. And then I do the same thing with location astrology, because most people today don't live where they were born. Now, a lot do. But and if they do, that's easier for me. But if you have moved from your birthplace, all of your transits, all your progressions are going to show up almost doubly. Why? Because you'll weaken the birth chart ones, and you'll strengthen where you live. So it kind of bifurcates the life. It's really fascinating stuff. And like, for instance, I've checked this out for years in my own life. It's just absolutely stunning how accurate it is.
All right. Does it seem like on an intuitive level that the planets, and I don't even know how to explain this, but to me, it seems like that the moving things around our solar system and the lights in the sky, not only that, our solar system is moving too, right? So everything's moving. You bet. So
at 500 million miles an hour.
When people talk about, I watched this special, Mikio Kaku was on this thing, and they were talking about quantum computing and things like that. And there's this big thing they were talking about, like trying to cool it down to zero and keep it synchronized, which was impossible, but they're trying to figure it out, right? When I look at the universe, I think that, that is a digital quantum computer that's just at the very least like programming things.
That's a good analogy. I like that. I think you're really close there. I think we are literally living in a spiritual reality machine. I really do. I think the universe and the solar system is a literal machine, but a spiritual one, a divine one that makes spirit manifest.
Yeah, right. Doesn't it seem like it's? I was listening to Liam Thomas Christopher, who wrote a book called Kabbalah, Magic, and the Great Work of Self-Transformation. And I got this download when he said that. He said everything in the universe, it seems, if you meditate enough, and he said something like this, probably butchering it, but that it's doing everything it can perfectly to create a body machine for our consciousness to experience life. It's trying to create. That's
what these bodies are. They're miraculous vessels that we experience the reality systems that we're in. The thing that irritates me the most is the religions have done very little to enlighten us and empower us. And the secret societies who have been totally challenged. There are some bad secret societies, but they have taught in the many mystery schools that the lower conscious mind is silly putty. Proof of that is, this is why the demonics work on the youth. They hammer the schools. They hammer the youth. George Carlin was right. War is when old men in business suits send young men off to war for their business interests. And it's really interesting because the youth is always been the one that they've targeted for programming. And that's because the lower conscious mind is much more impressionable, especially the first 7 years. See, every year of our life is a planetary year. The first year is the sun. The second year is the moon. The third year is Mars. The fourth year is Mercury. The fifth is Jupiter. The sixth is Venus. And the 7-year itch comes from Saturn. And we go through these periods every 7 years. And on our 49th year, we actually recommence. See, each 7 years is also a planet. It's sun, then moon, then Saturn. Then Mars, then Mercury, then Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. So that's also the days of the week. Sun is Sunday, moon is Monday, Mars is Tuesday, Mercury is Wednesday, Jupiter's Thursday. They named a restaurant, TGI, I think, on its Friday is Venus, and Saturday is Saturn. And these are eerie how accurate they are. And that's the law of 7. Even the secondary progressed moon that I mentioned earlier goes through each quadrant of your chart every 7 years.
So as complex as all this stuff is, that's a lot, right? So if someone looks at because most of the people I know, they want to learn this stuff, right? And I don't know if you still do that. Do you still teach this stuff to a few people, or do you still do that? Yeah,
I have people that I tutor with. I don't really have time to teach. I'm kind of busy, really doing this and other things. And I got to say, I have a lot of people. What I do is I'll give them books, and I'll suggest certain programs to go get for their computers. And then I often will do a session where I'll set up their computer programs through a system called TeamViewer, which a lot of programmers use.
Sure.
And I can jump in your computer and I put the pages on and get you set up. And then I'll direct people to a lot of books. I have studied with so many people, and I've studied so many different techniques. Some of them were wonderful. Some of them weren't. I had some teachers that were just plain, cul-de-sacs. It was okay. It was basic stuff that was okay, but didn't really go anywhere. And then I've had some that were absolute geniuses and amazing, because I think anytime you can approach whatever method of astrology you're using to realize you're really looking at spirit modulated into matter. And the planets, I don't think, are just a bunch of rocks out there with gases and masses floating around. They're portals. They're portals to the upper heavens, transmitting each individual soul root energy to them and their karmas. And they all do it uniquely. In other words, look at the planets. If you study anything about astrology, you'll find out real quick Saturn isn't just Saturn. You can have an exalted Saturn, a debilitated Saturn, a Saturn aspected by certain configurations in the birth chart. Nobody's Saturn is going to be exactly the same. Yet, Saturn is always the planet of karma. But depending on where it is, how it's positioned, totally changes the way you will manifest Saturn, I will manifest Saturn, or someone else will. You can't get the same chart twice. Plus, and this is where Naadi astrology will blow your hair back, the sun is the father, the moon is the mother, you see? And the brothers are usually Mars and Mercury. The sister will be the moon, or she could also be Venus. The wife is Venus. The husband is Mars. And you start looking at these configurations, and you look at them from different perspectives, and it's stunning how accurate it is. It's absolutely stunning how accurate it is. I studied with an old guy. He used to work for the Bankers District in London. And by the way, that's the guys who own this place. And were some of those very powerful families we hear all about. And this was many years ago, about 30 years ago. He would take a chart. He'd go, yep, this one will get married here. They'll do this here. They'll get sick here. They'll die here. And I go, how did you do that? And he said, well, I just look at Jupiter for the jiva, which is the blessings upon the soul when the karma is released. I look at Saturn for the karma and all of its different aspects. I look at K2 as the change. Rahu is the perception of reality. And when K2 and Saturn, the moon south node, join, and Rahu and Jupiter, they're out of here. They're dead. And it's pretty accurate. I got to tell you, it's not quite that simple, but it's pretty doggone close. And
so you could look at my chart and tell me when I'm going to die, basically.
Yeah, you can get a pretty good idea, especially if you run the Naadi progressions. See, the progressions really show the secrets. You basically progress Jupiter, Saturn, Rahu, and K2. See, Rahu and K2, for anybody listening, is the moon's north and south nodes. It's where eclipse points happen. And see, this gets into the ancient story of the Watchers. It also gets into the ancient story that we hear about. Of course, in the West, it's called the Adam and Eve story. But this same story exists in other ancient cultures. And that is, there was a war in heaven. And when human souls were first created, this demon Lilith did not want to participate with the first human man created, and she flew off. And she is believed to be a demonic force. And then later there were the Watchers. And this is where they came down and bred with the women of the earth, and the souls interblended. And of course, we hear these stories about the Nephilim and all these different things, and the giants and the flood of Noah. Probably true. Probably true, because, and I think they're still here. In fact, many people talk about the Cainites. These are certain bloodlines that are very demonic. And they exist right to this day. And they don't care about you or me or anyone else at all. And they're very interesting to be around. And I've actually seen people shapeshift. It's very wild stuff. And this may sound crazy, but you hear about it. David Icke has been called a nut for bringing this stuff out. Princess Diana talked about it, many others. But I could tell you this stuff, I think, is absolutely what's going on. And we've seen this throughout history. The violent, demonic forces, you look at the child trafficking, you look at the human slavery, the wars, and some of this stuff is absolutely created.
They're brutal.
Literally,
it makes
brutal.
People wonder,
it's demonic.
Most people don't want to talk about it, or they feel weird. And it's like, well,
it's demonic. It's what it is.
You have to know.
Well, what it is.
You have to know that the darkest of the dark is in our backyard. It's always been here. You can't.
I think it's bred right into the reality of fabric. I really do. I think the evil spirits were cast down when this particular dimension was created, at least at this time period. And I think the positions of the planets in the solar system are like a very complex standing wave. And so is the axis of the Earth. And nobody can tell me, or I don't know why, the Earth is sitting at the angularity it is, which is about 23 and 44 something degrees, or minutes. And there's not a guy in the sky holding the Earth at this angle. This is why we have the seasons. The sun doesn't go south in the winter and north in the summer. It appears to because of the angularity we're at. The sun's sitting right where it is. And you look at the rest of this solar system. It was interesting in the late 70s, I was working with a couple of guys that were writing the first computer programs. And they were working with NASA on the positions of the planets. And Robert Hand was one of them. And Robert Hand had said that they were timing these planets with very sophisticated equipment. And they weren't accurate, like kind of close. They were to the millisecond. It's like a cosmic standing wave clock reality machine, this whole celestial matrix called the solar system. Yeah, there's planetary wobble and there might be elliptical orbits and all that stuff.
But it's all happening perfectly, though. Even the wobbles.
Perfect. It's right. It's perfectly. This is why I love the old astrology. See, right around the 4th century, there were these Arabian kings who had said, they had found all this knowledge that was left over from Alexandria and Chaldea and many of the ancient worlds from all the wars. And they realized how profound it was. They went, my God, look at the astrology. Look at the spiritual knowledge and the knowledge of spirits and angels. They said, we've got to save this stuff. So they created something called the House of Wisdom. And there's been a number of translators who've really jumped on this bandwagon. This kind of started in the mid-'80s. And Robert Hand and Robert Schmidt, Robert Zoller were probably some of the earlier guys that did this, also Olivia Barclay. And they had brought forward a lot of the translations out of Greek, out of Latin, and later, there's Benjamin Dykes. He's another one with the Uranian Trust. They've been doing all these translations of these older astrologers. And I'm talking stuff from like the 4th century, 300 BC, 800. The astrology is not better because it's old. I think the air was cleaner and the food was better because these people were really smart. They had extraterrestrial contact, because there is no way in hell you could ever figure out the type of mathematics that they knew, the trigonometry of the Earth. They knew all the orbital, what they call elliptical dances of the planets up and down. They called them auges. There was one of my favorite astrologers. He was actually a medical astrologer too. His name was Rabbi Ibn Ezra. He lived in the 11th century. This astrology will smoke your noodle. I mean, it is so amazing. He's got angels, hierarchies for each planet, the archangel of the planet, the spirit of the planet, the intelligence of the planet. It's really wild stuff. And the sigils for the angels in each planet. And see, this is what we're getting into when we get into older astrology. We're seeing the spiritual matrix of creation. And it is, the religions, it's the work of the devil. I don't think so. I think it's the work of God in creation. I truly do. And all points in between.
Well, what about people that, all right. So what about like Astro? Now I'm not talking about everybody that gets out of body, but some really big players that got out of body, like Robert Monroe or William Buellman.
Oh, yeah.
These people never
everybody gets out of body every night when we sleep.
Yeah, but they never saw like angels, demons, but they did meet like lots of strange entities and things that didn't make sense and all kinds of crazy stuff. It just seemed, and even then, without the angels and the demons and all the stuff that they didn't meet, it still seemed to be a play of levels of consciousness. Like there were certain just levels, and I don't mean stair levels, just levels we can't comprehend, that we can't see. That
you just hit it on the head. It's different levels of consciousness. Yeah. They claim the astral planes alone, 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions. That's a labyrinth, my friend. That's a lot. And you hear about this stuff. See, a lot of people are throwing around, they're selling little classes where you can go get Merkaba. And I'm not demeaning some of these people, but that is very dangerous stuff. The Magus Astrovolos, who I mention a lot, really was quite advanced at astral travel. Yeah, but most of the astral travel that we do, when like I do remote clearings, so that's astral travel, and all of us are capable of doing that. But that's lower level. You're really staying in the lower stratospheres of this dimension. When you start getting higher, there's actually gates. There's literally gates that angels guard. And this was spoken about in many of the ancient Enochian stuff. Yeah. And also the books of Enoch and the Merkaba. It's in the Zohar. It's also some of the Tibetan lamas were very familiar with this, and yogis too. But it was very dangerous because the higher you go, you start really losing all references to reality. And it might be a real blessing that we are blocked from seeing angels, spirits, and demons, and elementals and disincarnate souls. See, elementals alone are all the strange entities that most astral travelers see, and they're very dangerous. Right. Some of those are what they call thought form elementals. They're literally created by groupthink. You could say societal elementals. You could say people who are very powerful. You've also got elementals, and these are the divine ones, that's created this entire world. In fact, they say the entire universes are the elementals of the upper seraphims, cherubims, and the thrones. They literally say if those angels, which are in the highest dimensions, ever stop chanting the permutations of creation, or God's name, if you will, the entire universes would cease to exist in less than a picosecond. They'd be gone.
Well, 49
and
is
I
so
really believe
gates,
that's true.
It makes sense to me because I'm big into the Kabbalistic stuff, and I understand the four worlds of the Kabbalah, right? The four worlds of creation, how things come into manifestation. But then there's also trees within each world, and then they say there's trees in each Sephirah, and I'm like, whoa, wait a minute, this thing is, this thing,
it's complex.
Yeah, and so to unlock the keys to the mystery is, like you're talking about, it helps you build the Merkaba consciously. And I'm like, wait a minute, okay, hold on a second. When I was studying this stuff, the reason why they have in the Western mysteries, to begin with, temples and all of these names and passwords and stuff is preparing you to know that when you get to that level in the astral planes, like, it's not safe. I mean, there's some, and if
no, it's not.
And there's big spiritual work to be done there. Like, if you want to get out of body, play around, whatever, that's what I've done. It's fine. But like, if you're going to do like spiritual work, that kind of stuff, and go into the astral realm and do that, I think you need to slow your roll. Like I've always told people, slow down if you're going to get into this stuff, because you don't know what can happen to your psyche. You really
It's very
don't.
dangerous. It really is. It's referred to in the Zohar and many other texts that speak about this. Chaldean magic had a lot of this stuff too. Very dangerous stuff. The better way is I love the book of Abramelin, because most people rush to the back of the book and look at all the sigils and the angels and what they can do. That stuff's useless. You'll never get anywhere. The whole gist of that book is to purify the soul through 6 lunations, from the spring equinox to the fall equinox. And if your soul's pure enough, the upper angels will come to you. And it's not that simple. There seems to be a lot of different levels of that as well. And they will then give you the keys to what you can handle at that point. And that's where the true saints and the prophets really had the power. And I believe that we'll find, as consciousness raises in what we call time, but I think everyone will keep reincarnating until they advance. And some people are very advanced in their bodies right now. And then we leave. You can see this in Naadi astrology. See, if a person is born with certain configurations in the chart, it shows they're very advanced spiritually. And you look at Jupiter, you look at K2, you look at its placements. See, K2 is the portal out of this place. It is the moon's south node. It's also what they call the portal of Moksha. And it's very interesting, these eclipse points, because we always think of death as physical death. Everyone is born, everyone grows, everyone matures, everyone atrophies, and everybody dies. Nobody gets around that. But they're more speaking about the path of the nefesh joining with the inner spirit. And then there's something called the neshama. It's a strange word that means the portal of karmic interchange between the lower portions of the soul and the upper 3 portions of the soul. And once the soul is purified through either enough incarnations or raising the vibration of consciousness and awareness, we escape from Alcatraz, and it's believed we pass out of here and we start going to these other worlds. And that's, I'm not sitting here saying I know, but I could tell you nobody I've ever met has ever been able to figure this out. But the mysteries of Naadi astrology certainly shows the indicators when someone's more likely to achieve that. Usually, even things as simple as the moon being in the 12th house immediately makes one more sensitized. But you have to look at the sign it's in and see there's something called the Trim Samsa. And this gets into divisional charts. And this is why birth time, I always rectify the birth time right to the second. And I read people's energy right before I do the reading. And I try and figure out, when did they draw first breath? Because they say the angel attaches the spirit, psyche, and soul by silver cord to the embryo at conception. The Egyptians made a big deal out of that one too. And that's when the attachment or assignment was made. But that doesn't mean life will happen. After the period of gestation, which for some women comes early, comes late, or right on time, it's usually about 9 months. When that child exits the womb, that's when, and literally we don't breathe until that umbilical cord is cut and that sac is broken and we're out in the air. And right when that happens, they say the angel waits for the proper celestial influences, and bam, that spirit is tied to the body. I never knew if that was true until my son was born. And I always heard this. And by the way, people can look this up. It's actually in a text called the Sefer Haggadah. Haggadah in Aramaic and Hebrew means the legends of the soul. And it's really pretty profound. And it actually says that angel who ties us in will then step back and let us live our perception of reality. And when it's time to leave, that same angel will come and take the soul from the body. And it's very interesting stuff. And there's a real specific division between the lower conscious portion of the soul, the spirit, and the upper 3 portions of the soul. There's actually 5 layers. And they oftentimes may not fully leave or join at the same time. This is very mysterious stuff.
Wow.
And that's pretty deep.
I want to get more into that, but we got to take a break here at the top of the hour.
Yeah, okay.
I want to talk a little bit more about...
Yeah, we'll get into that when we come back. I'll tell you a book that shows you that. It's really
Absolutely.
cool.
We'll be right back with Jeff Harman. Stay with us. All right, welcome back to Lighting the Void Radio. I'm your host, Joe Roop. We're here live with Jeff Harman, live on the Fringe FM. We're heading deeper into the late night here on December the 6th. And interesting stuff. Jeff is an astrologer, but knows quite a bit about the esoteric. And we were talking earlier before we left the break, and you can visit his website to jeffharman.com to get his services. But we were talking before during the break about the soul, the parts of the soul, when the soul comes into being, and this complex system we call our solar system and universe that seems to be permeating a reality which consciousness can live and create life. And I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to understand all this. But before I get into that, Jeff, I want you to finish where you left off about, the angels that watch the soul as it becomes born and all of that before I get to my next question.
Yeah. Where we left off was, and I've had a lot of clients, including myself, who've remembered pre-birth experiences, like they didn't want to come here, or some did want to come here. One of the more interesting stories I heard is that, I was talking to a client. I said, boy, your brother really had a hard time. And she said, yeah, he told me he stood outside of the celestial influences and they said, you have to go back. And he said he didn't want to go. And they literally pushed him down a black hole. Next thing you know, he's born. So, and I remember stuff similar to that. And all of us can. The lower conscious mind, they actually say there's a mark of silence made between the nose and the upper lip. It's right where Cupid's bow is on all of our lips. It's a mark that is made to knock us out. And many of us, there's a lot of people very psychic. They can go and get in touch with, things, and we can go for past life regressions and readings and so on and so forth. But none of us can fully stay in contact. The lower conscious mind is so rooted in these five senses and this reality. And it might be a blessing that it is, because we wouldn't be able to experience life the same way if we couldn't. Which brings me to the book I wanted to mention. If people are interested in taking a look, down the rabbit hole of where some of this stuff goes, there's a really interesting book you can get online. It's called the Shar Hagilgum. That's a strange word. Share or shar is a word in Aramaic and Hebrew that means gate or gates. And Hagilgum means cycling of the souls. And it was actually a text that's not that old. It was written in the 14th century. And it was written by Rabbi Luria, who was a very interesting man. He was a student to a very, very well-known Kabbalistic rabbi named the Ari. And in the Hebrew, Ari means the lion. And this man was born completely physically blind. He couldn't see. But he only lived to his 30s, but he could see souls. He could literally see your soul when you would come up. Couldn't see you physically. And he would see your past lives and various different things. And when he died, he had Rabbi Luria, his student, write this book called the Shari Hagilgum. And in this whole system that I'm talking about is in there. And it's quite fascinating because it shows the hierarchy of the breakdown of the five parts of the soul. And it also shows very interesting things about certain souls who are much more advanced and joining things together. Again, the religions have done very little to shed light on this. You're all sinners and you're all going to hell and astrology is the work of the devil certainly doesn't cut it. And we have a right to, I think, explore these areas. And if we don't, I think we're hurting our evolution, our consciousness, because all of us are spiritual beings having a physical experience. We're all at different levels of conscious self-awareness. And it's interesting because the older we get, And not always. You see a lot of older people who aren't very conscious, and you see a lot of them who are. I see some 3-year-olds that are more conscious than 90-year-olds. So it's no simple rule. It's really the soul and the evolution of where the soul is at. And there's many examples throughout history of very advanced souls coming here. And what's, I think, important is the more we start getting in touch with just the possibilities of who we are and how much the world's been a lie to us. And it really has. We all get spanked on the rear end. Our moms, our dads, our, interactions in schools and our friends. Nobody's really bringing us out of this. And this is really, we're all locked into this matrix of reality. And boy, there's a lot of them. I mean, you go just look around at the different cultures throughout the world. You look at the different, even within our own culture of the United States, how many different viewpoints are there? Different cultures and within, subcultures within the whole country and the world. It's stunning. So there's no reality. There's only perception. And I think if you start there, that opens us up to being much more, I think, aware. And I always get nervous when somebody says, well, I believe. Well, right there, you've just committed yourself. There's nothing wrong with belief and faith and all that stuff, but to lose objectivity, or at least the openness to look at various different viewpoints of who we are, I think is kind of dangerous. I really do. And I think it's really mind expanding when we begin to realize, and books like the Sharia Gilgam help that. Books like the Magus of Strovolos. The Sharia Gilgam is very unique because it's a system and a framework, very much like the trees of life are, that allow our simplistic minds, because we're all simplistic. I certainly feel I am. We all need structure. That's why they put lines on the road, right? So we don't drive in the other guy's lane. So we all need structure to wrap our lower conscious minds around, to relate to a model or to relate to a system. And I think the Sharia Gilgam is one text that offers some really interesting viewpoints. In the final pages of that book, there's 40 chapters. There's a great story about spirit possession. And see, this is something that many of the books I mentioned, that if people go to my website, it's, or not my website, my YouTube channel, it's Jeff Harman Astrologer, Jeff Harman Vedic Astrologer. You'll see there's a lot of videos we've done on there on the soul and a lot of these things I'm talking about. And one in particular that's really interesting is some of the psychiatrists and psychologists who've realized that we're not alone. And this is what the Sharia Gilgam gets into in that final chapter. And that is that they actually break it down that there's elementals we can be possessed with, which is kind of close to what psychologists call your beliefs. There's also disincarnate souls, and there's many different types. There's souls that join us that are actually really advanced, that help us. And this actually happens at 13 years old, believe it or not, and throughout our life, about every 7 years. There's also very dangerous souls that can join with us. And one of the things that is always mentioned in these texts is, and we've heard this in more modern terms, is the law of attraction or resonance. See, the vibration, the upper vibrational souls and angels will leave evil people. They won't stay around them. And we become like a magnet that attracts vibrational energy that's very parallel to us. This is why Paramahansa Yogananda actually mentioned you can, in a sense, cheat the astrology a little bit or bend it by wearing the right gemstones and avoiding the wrong ones. And that's called Vedic Planetary Gemology. So there's a lot of ways through purity, through consciousness, through gemstones, and like you were mentioning earlier, Joe, is to keep aware of the cycles you're in. One of the most powerful karmic cycles every soul goes through is something called Saturn's 7.5-year transit of the moon, known as Sati Sate. And people might say, well, Sati what? That's what I said when I first heard it. Sati Sate is a strange term that means it's the 7.5-year period during which Saturn, the planet of karma. If anybody's familiar with astrology, look at the glyph of Saturn. It's the cross over the crescent of the moon. Look at Jupiter. It's exactly the opposite. The crescent of the moon is above the cross. So Jupiter is life, blessings, and expansion. Saturn is karma. So when Saturn goes over the moon, it's a time of initiation, transformation, integration, and resultant dissipation of karma. And here's what's interesting. Everybody will get this at least 2 times in their life, and they may live to a third, depending on where the moon was in your birth chart. And you can use tropical, you can use sidereal. That cycle stands, though the sidereal is a little more accurate in this thing. And what it does is it's the purgement of stored energies and elementals that are attached to the soul, which in my opinion proves the planets are transmitters. They're portals of spiritual, etheric soul energy. They're not just planets. Think of a satellite. Right now, Joe, you and I are transmitting through Zoom. Okay, that goes through a satellite. Billions of signals go through satellites every single day. And there's not one of them the same. See, so think of the planets the same way, that each planet has its inherent traits, but it's multifaceted on what it can transmit to each individual soul. And we're not talking just humans here either. We got 8+ billion humans running around the planet. God only knows how many other terrestrial beings we have, let alone animals and plants and mineral kingdoms. So everything was believed by the ancients to be influenced by the heavens. They were literally the modulators and transmitters of energy to the physical world. And that's the principles behind Naadi astrology. That's why I always loved getting into the ancient stuff, is because it wasn't just astrology. It was the essence of spiritual existence and life intertwined. See, Jyotisha in Vedic astrology actually means the science of the light of the soul. And it is. It's really quite profound. And it's not just astrology. It's really a look-see at creation, which is, I think, really profound. And the Shari Gilgam is a good book to look at as well on that. So it's different viewpoints and really cool.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. I wonder if, well, I think it gets overwhelming for a lot of people too, because it's like, man, while I'm living here, right, I just want to, I think for the most part, right, people just want to be
Earth
happy.
is tough, man.
Yeah, they want to be
tough.
happy, they want to be loved, they want to be comfortable, and they want to experience some kind of fulfillment, whether that's their dreams, whatever they're passionate about. It seems so simple when you think about it. When you think about it, it seems simple. But I want to go back to this thing that you were talking about karma. See, I know the reason why a lot of people study this stuff is because they'd like to have some type of edge or control or understanding on how to better their life through understanding these things. Do you believe that we can do that, or are we just going to be kind of subject to certain things that there's just nothing we can do about, other than death, by the way?
Oh, no, I totally think we can do something about it. In fact, the game was to escape from Alcatraz and get out of the astrology, the influence of the karma. And it's interesting because when you start looking at yourself as a sentient being who's here only for a finite amount of time, and you start looking at yourself in that broader perspective, you start realizing this life is an experience. It's an important one. And, we all have to take care of our lives and take care of our bodies and our responsibilities and all that. But life in a lot of ways in the modern world is a bit of a lie. It really is, because how many people I have looked into who are on the other side who say, I wasn't taught this, and it's so different. Many of one of my favorite books is a book by a psychiatrist named Dr. Carl Wickland called 30 Years Among the Dead. And I mention this book a lot because it's a profound book. This is a psychiatrist who invented shock therapy treatment, which is used to this day. Now, why do they do shock therapy treatment? Well, most people having schizophrenia or multiple personality disorders or other anomalies seem to improve for some odd reason when they get shock therapy treatment. Now, it's a hideous situation. I'm not endorsing it, but I'm saying, why does it work? And it does. And he graduated from the Chicago School of Medicine, I think in 1918, long time ago, and very much science. He did not care about spirituality, didn't believe in anything spiritual, science, right? Mr. Scientist. So he ended up coming to Los Angeles at the birth of Hollywood. Valentino was running around and, Griffith and all these people and, making movies out here in the late teens, early 20s. Well, he became the head of the Los Angeles County Mental Institution. And as fate would have it, he went to a party and met this beautiful woman. He became smitten with her and he wanted to marry her. He said, that's it. I'm going to marry this woman. I'm smitten. I'm in love. Well, she turns out to be a psychic channel. So now you've got, Mr. Science, Mr. Shock therapy treatment, lobotomies, marrying a person who's a psychic channel. And he didn't believe in any of this stuff, but he was so taken with her and so impressed by her personality. He said, I'm going to do a scientific study to see if you're delusional. Well, he did. And to his amazement, she took on a disincarnate soul, which we would call dead people. And all of a sudden, somebody else starts talking. He says, you're the one who's shocking me with that lightning. And the doctor said, what do you mean? And this person proceeded to describe a shock therapy treatment that went totally awry. And he said, and they knew every detail. And the doctor says, my God, he said, you had to have been there. He said, well, of course I was. You're shocking me. He said, well, you must be, not alive and you must be in my wife's body. And he says, this is crazy. And the guy looks down, controlling his wife's body, and sees the wedding ring and the dress. And he says, oh my God, you're right. He says, this is strange. He says, this explains a lot of things. Nobody listens to me anymore. I can't seem to get out of this dark place. And I'm very angry. Well, guess what? That's when Dr. Wicklund got him to realize his condition and basically got him to see a relative. I think it was his mother or something. It's all in the book. And basically went off into the light. Well, guess what? What the clincher was, the patient in the mental ward who got the shock therapy treatment completely cleared up. And this was probably one of the earlier well-documented psychiatric proofs of disincarnate souls and all this stuff in the astral plane, the lower astral planes. And he was amazed. And that's where the book gets its title, 30 Years Among the Dead. The next 30 years, he documented in explicit detail all these depossessions and clearings that he and his wife had done by her channeling these things. And, now today, a lot of people are familiar with clearing work. I've done it. I've had it done on me. And talk about astrology. About 27 years ago, I knew I had a very special progression. See, this is where astrology, the anxious stuff, really gets interesting. If you, in your birth chart, have any of the lights, which is the sun and the moon, or very powerful planets crossing your ascendant, which could only happen once in a lifetime. See, these are primary directions. Remember, I said earlier, every 90 days after birth is the next 90 years for each soul. And every one of us will have different progressions crossing different, what we call angles in the chart, the ascendant, the midheaven, the IC, and the descendant. And I can tell you when this stuff happens, you are releasing karmic energy. Astrologers look at it as astrology, but what's really happening is it's the code of angels. You're literally releasing things on the soul, just like when Saturn transits the moon. So all of this dovetails into proof, in my opinion, that we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And the astrology is not us. We're not our astrology. We're not our sun signs. It's the modulators on the releasement in what we call time on the soul.
Fascinating. Yeah, because I've met so many people that are like, well, I'm an Aries, you're an Aries, and I'm an Aries. And it's like, yeah, but none of us are the same. Like I've even had relationships with people that they're the same sun sign as me, but they're not anywhere close to me at all. right? So
thank you. Yeah.
It's
pop astrology. It's love, light, and clues.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
The old stuff. The old stuff is astronomy. That's why it's good.
But it has to. So our sun sign has to mean something spiritually, though. I would assume.
Oh, it does. The sun is the lower sense of self in the nefesh. If you look at the Sharia Gilgam, the sun is what they call Atma. Atma is the sense of self. It's what makes you, Joe, me, Jeff, and everyone else who they are. But it's not us. It's the inner sense of the boundaries that we call ourselves. But again, it's a generalized, condition. And yeah, there is some vague similarities to sun signs. There's no question. But you got to look at everything. Where is the sun? What degree is it in? What bound is it in? What's it aspected by? What house is it in? It's not that simple. And Naadi astrology takes it way higher because, see, in Vedic astrology, you have all these divisions of the zodiac that you don't have in Western astrology. They're called Vargas, and they rule different areas of life. Like the Trim Samsa shows the karma you're here to experience. And you mentioned earlier something very interesting. You said, are we bound to the karmas? Well, here's what's really interesting. In the Naadi astrology, they talk about when you hit certain time periods in your life that is ruled by doshas and earth and water trines, you tend to get more free will. So it's an amalgam of free will and destiny. When you hit doshas and major progressions in air and fire, those are called parabdha karmas. You are swept in the path. You have to experience. It's like, it's like voltage in a wire. It has to be grounded out. It has to be dissipated. So it's like that for all of us. And there's different time periods when no matter how much we try and control our destiny, it seems to control us. And there's other times when we take action and what we do works out really well, and other times it doesn't. So these are indicated as general periods in the Naadi progressions. It's quite profound, and it's really accurate too. And it's in the chart. It really is.
So the house systems I've always been curious about too, because they have different house systems. Like, I'm wondering how people even came up with that, right? Like, how did people come up with
especially in the West? If you're talking the West, oh yeah, you got Koch and Placidus, you got Regiomontanus. I mean, your eyeballs will cross. Well, they're smart. What they did is they came up with the passages of the planets in their zodiacal belt around the Earth, which is actually pretty narrow. So they were using the trigonometry of where the ascendant, midheaven, and descendant were. And then there's different methods on how they would divide all the houses around the chart. And then there's the whole signers, which is what Vedic, you could say, Parashara astrology uses. And they also use a lot of different methods of division. So yeah, they were smart. I really think extraterrestrials were involved. And I also believe angels were involved, because there's no way anyone could have come up with the sophistication that is extant in a lot of these older texts. There's no way. I mean, that's pretty advanced stuff. They didn't have slide rules. They didn't have computers. And algebra wasn't even invented. And yet they were doing trigonomic calculations on the Earth that were stunning. And I have the books to prove it. Just go look at Ibn Isra and how he elaborates what he calls the difference of the orbital circles on each planet. It'll blow your hair back. So, I mean, you go, okay, wait a minute. This guy had better coffee than I've got.
Right. I mean, so if you personally saw, let's say you pulled open Solar Fire, you looked at your transits, and you saw, I don't know, a rough transit coming up. What do you do personally? Do you just say, well, this is the way it's going to be, or do you prepare yourself? Do you try to dodge what it's talking about?
It's a good idea to understand it. That's where you start, is you understand the energies, because every transit, I've seen good transits turn out bad. Good example is, I've seen, people will typically say trines and sextiles and conjunctions, if they're with good planets, tend to be very good. But I've seen people go off the deep end. They start partying or doing drugs or alcohol, and they have such a good time that they really destroy their lives. And I've seen challenging aspects rightly understood, and it really makes the soul grow. It depends, because, like the bad aspects are always, hard aspects, like oppositions and squares and conjunctions to malefics, like Saturn conjunct Mars. Here's a good example. I had a Saturn conjunct Mars about 15 years ago, and I knew it was coming. Well, you go get Robert Hand's Planet and Transits, or you go look it up on the internet. What does Saturn conjunct Mars mean? Well, kind of one definition is kind of like beating your head against the wall. Very frustrating, intense situations. Why? Saturn karma, Mars is intensity. But here's the positive side of that. That's also a time when you can roll up your sleeves and get some hard work done. It's great for working out as long as you're careful. It can be dangerous, though, if you're around dangerous situations. I had something that I was trying to do. I was putting an air ride system in a motion picture vehicle, and it was a pain in the rear end. I had gone to all these different shops, and they said, well, Mr. Harman, that's going to cost you a lot of money. And I figured, well, you know what? I got Saturn conjuncting Mars. This is a time when you get in the mud and the blood and the beer, and you get down there and you make it happen. And I did. I jacked that thing up, and I got the welder out, and I started grinding and went to the metal shop and cut all these beams and jacked them up in there with hydraulic jacks and welded her up. And it was a great usage of the energy. Now, I could have sat in my living room and beat my head against the wall, but I thought the latter was a better way to do it. So every energy is just that. And I think if we realize it, now there are some energies you're at the effective. Like if you got Pluto transiting your descendant, what's the descendant? The seventh house. You're likely to find somebody will try and sue you, or you'll have a relationship that goes Krakatoa, or you're going to be dealing with some really pushy partner in some way, shape, or form, or people. If you've got even short-term transits like Mars in the seventh, I drive a motorcycle, and I am very careful when I see dangerous transits. I sometimes won't drive. I'll go, wait a minute, I got today Mars is conjuncting Mercury. Well, and if I got to drive, I drive real careful. I put safety, protection, awareness before me, behind me, at my right, at my left, above me, below me, and all unto me and everybody I'm riding with. See, just knowing it changes it. It's like martial arts. If you know the guy's going to kick you in the head, what do? You stand there and take it, or you move to the side, and when he's out of balance, you grab his hand or grab his foot, and he's out of balance. So you can always, I think, make energies better if you understand them than you would have had you just stood there and done nothing. And that's the magic of free will.
Right. Like, so I have a lot of tough squares coming up, right? And some transitory, like big transitional stuff coming up, but the worst thing you could do is just hide it. Oh, let me just hide and wait till it passes, right? Well, then you're not really working out the.
Well, Joe, you're in a K2 dasha. See, in the Vedic astrology, so now you're going to get a little reading here. Let me fire up your chart. So you can't see what I'm doing, but I'm actually opening Joe Roop's chart. So let me find you right here. Hang on, I got you in here somewhere.
I'm kind of looking at a solar fire myself.
Solar fire is a great program.
Yeah.
Well, the first place I'd start is in the Vedic dashas and transits. There you are, Joe Roop. So, see, you're in the K2 dasha. You're in the tail of the dragon. And your K2 is in the fourth house. Isn't that interesting? You moved, So issues with moving around right now. See, your K2 is also disposed by Jupiter in the second, and it's aspected by Mars and Saturn. So, yeah, it's an unusual time. That's where I'd start first. And then the second place I'd look is your Naadi progressions. Yeah, see, you got Saturn over Venus right now. You got K2 over Mars and Saturn. See, there you go. That's why, see, K2 is a destiny modifier. Some call it a destiny disruptor. So you have K2 right now by transit, actually right at the beginning of December, moved over on your Earth trine over the Mars and Saturn. So expect the unexpected. This is a time when clearly a lot of change, but it's also good because the positive side of that is you can expand like you're doing in technology, start doing things more with video, expand your horizons. See, Mars and K2 also rule technological advancements. Let's see here once. The transit, so you got to look at everything. You can't just look at one thing. You got to look at the entire chart. And if I get your tropical system up, the first thing I look for is where is that Saturn? And
it's in my first
and
house.
Jupiter and Mars.
Yeah,
well, there you go. That'll do it right there. Let's see here, Joe.
It's in Libra in the first house, right? It's
no, it had to be in Pisces because in tropical it's in Pisces right now.
No, well, really?
Yeah, by transit, yeah.
Oh, the transit. Got it. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah. Right. In tropical. It's in Aquarius and sidereal. It's about a 24-degree difference. Here you are. Yeah, but right off the bat, you're in a K2 dasha. See, K2 is a 7-year period, and you're going to remain in that until about another 6 years, 2030. You'll jump out of it. See, and then you hit 20 years of Venus, which is really good. See, and you're not going to get out of that until you're in your late 60s.
Really?
Really good. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're going to hit Venus.
Well, I hit 20 years of Venus. That's
You'll hit that about March, if this birth time is right, about March 31st, April 1st of 2030, which, if you do the math, is not much more than a little over 6 years from now, about 6 years and 4 months, something like that. So, but see, you're fresh into K2. You're in the sub period of K2 Venus. And that, let me just look at that. Yeah, see, you're going to hit K2 Sun. These are called antar or sub periods of your dasha. So this is powerful stuff. And you got to really weigh in. What do they mean? And when I come back to your birth chart, yeah, so you got transiting Saturn in the 5th, Jupiter's in the 7th, Mars is right now.
Does it mean the party's
2nd.
over for 6 years? Is that what it means?
No, it doesn't mean that. No, it means change. Great changes.
Okay.
A lot of changes in the way you do things. See, Saturn and K2 are being, I should say, Saturn and Mars are being transited by K2. See, Mars is the way you expend energy, and Saturn is your karma. So you've got a lot of old karmas releasing right now, and it'll be very dynamic. A lot of stuff probably from your childhood and your father are going to heal up through this period, even though it'll be unusual. It'll really heal up because K2 is transiting the Saturn. So it releases a lot of stuff. And let me just see, what else are you in
Releasing
here?
karma is always a good thing, right?
It is. Yeah, it is.
Bring on the Venus.
Bring on the Venus. Yeah, see, that Earth trine is receiving. See, your K2 is also on the Mercury and the Sun. So is Rahu. So that's good. This is going to bring a lot of changes over the next couple of years. See, things really start shifting. See, you're going to hit your second Saturn's transit of your moon right around 2030. Would it be about 2034? Actually, no, it'll be a little sooner than that, about 2031, which is 7 years from now. You're going to begin Sati Sate. And see, you're still going to be young. It's going to be great. That's your second Sati Sate, too. So that's when the rubber really hits the road, which isn't very far from now. It's only 7 years from now, about 6.5, 7 years.
So I need to play my cards right for the next few years, get my stuff together. That's what I think.
Yeah, you want to be careful driving because K2 and Mars can bring abruptness of energy. So that part you definitely, and again, knowing that, you just pay more attention. I have found, at the very least, you can really change these energies. See, you've also got, let me just see here, you've got Saturn squaring Uranus. You don't have that many squares, actually. Let me look at this here. You really only want to look at the outer planets. It's the inner ones definitely are triggers and they really matter, but the outer ones. See, you've got Saturn transiting Jupiter by trine this February. So yeah, this has been a disruptive year. This next year is a lot better because see, you're going to end up with Jupiter sextiling the moon. It's going to trine the Jupiter. So yeah, a lot of changes here. And then you got Jupiter starting to trine Mars. A lot of rapid activity between February and June for you. Yeah, a lot of changes. Yeah. And the other one you got to look at is the secondary progress moon. Without that one, you really lose where you're at. See, your secondary progress moon is in the fourth house. So definitely focus on the home and the family right now, reorientation. See, the moon in the fourth house in 7 years from now, it's going to transit your 7, and 14 from now, you're going to hit a major life peak. So that's really important. And so, yeah, you're, let me see where you're at.
Don't tell me when I'm going to die, Jeff. I don't want to know.
No, I'm not going to tell you that. I don't even look for that stuff. And I try and not bring that stuff out. There's another program I run the Naadi progressions on. But yeah, see, when you get right around 54, 55, you're going to have a major life peak. It's really going to be good because actually you'd be about 53 or 54. Your progress moon is going to go through your 10th and 11th houses. And that's always a major life peak for everyone. And everybody will experience that to the degree of their birth chart. And it's really quite good. The other one you got, and I'm being really topical here. Usually I spend 30 minutes, 40 minutes before I get on.
I've got a reading from you. It's extensive. It's pretty deep and extensive.
Yeah. You got, let me just see, is that right here? Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, see, you will live to have the moon cross your ascendant. See, this is a real interesting path of the soul. You will, let me see when that is. See, that'll be 19. So that's 11 plus 7. You're going to be in your 70s, maybe late 60s. You're going to have the primary directed moon cross your ascendant. Anytime that happens, and that can only happen to certain individuals. Most people will never live to see it happen unless you are born with the moon in a quadrant between the midheaven and the ascendant. And if you are, which you are, your moon is very close to your midheaven. It's a ways away, but it's actually 1 degree away. It's pretty close. So you will live to see the moon cross your ascendant, which is really profound because that means a major karmic releasement on the soul is going to happen. And it's often a great time of awakening too. That's powerful. See, you got Saturn in the ascendant, but you got an exalted Saturn in the ascendant.
Yeah.
It's good.
From what I've studied, Saturn like, is if I keep a balance in my life and I take care of what Saturn's trying to teach me to take care of, then I'll flourish. Yeah. If I don't, I'll kind of suffer, which is like, I've seen
good Saturns, people are responsible. Every time I see somebody with a debilitated Saturn, especially in the Vedic astrology, I know there's an edge there. I've seen it. I've seen people, they can be wicked, man, with debilitated Saturns, poorly aspected. And it's no, thing against the person. It just means they're bearing a lot of old karma. See, when you get in your early 50s to mid 50s, you're going to go through Sati Sate. That's a huge, huge time of success. And again, that's very close, like I said, to the progress moon hitting the 9th and 10th and 11th houses. That's all like about a 7-year period in there. Really powerful. And I'm just being general. But these things are quite powerful. If you study primary and solar arc directions, you literally can see each degree equals a year. See, over the next 2 years, you've got Mars trining the moon. Over the next 2.5 years, you've got Saturn trining Mercury. This is really good for communications, really good. You're going to feel like Popeye on spinach with those. Those are really good. That's really good. So, I would say when I get a little bit queasy is when I see Mars over Neptune or Neptune over Mars. Or those are malefic aspects, squares and conjunctions and oppositions to Mars and Neptune, Pluto and Mars, Saturn and Mars, those kind of things. Sun and Saturn is challenging. You got some good stuff going on. The next 6 months, you have Jupiter sextiling Saturn. See, that's within 30 minutes of arc. 1 degree is a year, 15 minutes is 3 months, 30 minutes is 6, and 45 minutes is 9 months. So it's literally math. You're just looking at degrees and transposing them into months, days, and years. And it's absolutely stunning how accurate it is. You don't even need to believe it. It just happens.
That's cool. Yeah, it gets really complex. Like I've spent hours on
once you understand it. No, once you understand it. The biggest problem I had learning astrology was studying with a bunch of people that didn't know what the hell they were doing. And they lead you off the track. If you get with the right people, they immediately direct you to don't pay attention. It's like driving a car, you know. You don't screw around with the brake when you're trying to get on the gas. You see, you just, once you know what matters and what doesn't, and you start getting the system down, it's like anything. It gets simpler the more you study it. And it's really a map of astronomy and geometry. It really is.
Yeah. See,
astrology is taught wrongly, I think, in a lot of circles. I really do.
I try to look at everything, and maybe you can speak to this, everything, whether it's a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, Kabbalistically, and all of these things are told in the story of the modern tarot that was based from Renaissance, not the tarot before. But I try to look at everything, the tarot, Kabbalah, astrology, like all of this stuff. To me, it's not so much about divination, but I want to like grow my soul, man. You know what I mean? Like I want to know more about life and myself and all of this stuff. And I think all of these systems, especially astrology and especially the Kabbalah, are good systems for these things.
Yeah, they can help. They can help a lot. Any way you can achieve consciousness is great.
Right. I'm just afraid it's going to get distorted because, you get on YouTube nowadays and people are doing tarot and astrology readings based on certain sun signs and, here's your reading for Aquarius or this or that. And it's all filtered through different people and their energies and what they think. And there's the soul and the individual is so much more divine and complex than to try to find a simple answer from simple things like that, I think,
Well, now you're cracking into what's been going on forever. There's always been charlatans. Not that a lot of these people aren't well intended, but there was always the inner circle of true divine knowledge. And then there was what goes on the street and makes the silver cross the palms. And, that's all about, they're just making a living. And a lot of it's half-baked stuff that they just never had the blessing of learning from some good sources, And, I think, the whole game here is how do we stay focused in a common sense way to what all this stuff means? Because when you start getting all woo-woo and getting into all these cul-de-sacs, some of these people, you're right, they get pretty out there. Others are much more focused. Astrology is very complex. It's exceedingly complex. But the more I do it, the more I try and simplify it and focus on what is it, what does it say, and what does it mean, and get a message from it that you can take away and put to practical use. Because if you can't do that, that's like standing in front of your car and trying to figure out how they designed the transmission. Good luck. Right. It's just easier to get in it and put it in drive and go to the grocery store, right? So that's, you got to always come up with, how can we put something into simplicity? What can I take away with this? And this is it. Like you're in a K2 Dash, a time of great spiritual change. That's going to change in 6 years. You hit 20 years of Venus. But if you look at your sub-periods, you'll really know. And see, that's where astrology can be very valuable. If you just start noting where the sub-periods are, and you know enough about astrology where if you could tune into that, you would begin to understand. See, and these tick off. I give sheets in the reading that literally show you all those subperiods. I don't know if I gave you a book years ago, but in the book and the readings, I give everybody their whole life path. And it's very useful and very instrumental because you can find when these periods move, you can really expect a shift energetically. And there's actually a whole method of what they call remedial measures that Vedic astrology uses. And it's actually not even astrology. It's called Tantra. And many people may be familiar with yoga and Kundalini yoga and all this stuff. And there's charlatans in that. And there's also really good people in that. But the remedial measures were to understand the time periods you're in. Like you're in a K2 dasha. So one of the things you could do, Joe, is you could light a candle, light some incense, and you chant a K2 mantra 108 times. And you say, well, why would I do that? Well, there's 108 divisions in the lunar zodiac that surrounds the earth. And this is called the 27 nakshatras. And it's really quite magical because that's, again, a lot to do with spirit manifesting on this earth. And the mantra was used to quiet the conscious mind. And what you do is you stare at the base of the flame of the candle when you do the mantra, and you push any negativity up through it. You'll find the base of the flame is always blue where it's consuming the wick of matter. And as it goes up, it gets brighter and brighter. And the mantra is like a carrier frequency. It's like when we tune into a radio station, whatever your favorite one is, 95 point whatever, you tune into that carrier frequency. You don't hear the carrier frequency. You hear the music modulated on that carrier frequency. That's how the ancient method of mantras, I believe, was meant to be used. And I've heard that from many old yogis that are not around anymore. And essentially what you're doing is you're quieting the conscious mind with the repetition of the mantra, and you're opening the consciousness to let it come in. Like the mantra for you, Joe, is a K2 Bij mantra, and you chant Om Kaim Ketave Namaha. See, Om is God, or all-pervading light. Kaim Ketave is the Sanskrit or Tamil for the archangel of Ketu, which is the moon south node of karma. Namaha means honor or reverence to. So you put it in a cadence like Om Kaim Ketave Namaha. You slide a bead. Om Kaim Ketave Namaha. And you quiet the conscious mind after 108 of those. And you just focus and see what comes in. Oftentimes people will do it the first day and they'll feel a shift. And then after a few days of this, if they do it at the same time every day, they'll really feel a change. See, and then I would tell you to wear chrysoberyl cat's eye right now. And if you want me, I get those really inexpensively. My partner is a wholesaler. She's almost 80 years old. She's been dealing in gems for pretty close to 50 years now, and one of the largest wholesalers in the North American continent. So I get really good gems, and I get the pick of the litter because you have to watch it. If you get online, a lot of gems are treated, but you would do well to wear a cat's eye, a chrysoberyl cat's eye. Now you can get cat's eyes for $40 at the local rock shop. They may help you a little bit, but they're not that powerful. You want a chrysoberyl. That's a lemony. You can go on my website at jeff@jeffharman.com and you can see those. What I do is I cast the metals at a good time and I set the gem in the piece at a good astrological time to your birth chart. See, and we also want the nodes at the time I set it to be well aspected by the moon. It's like a talisman. It isn't like it is. It's a talisman. You concretize the energy astrologically when you set the gem. And then you cleanse the gem 3 times with spring water, and you place it on an angelic square called a yantra. And you would want a K2 yantra because those are actually the angelic squares that match and resonate with that gem. And you chant the mantra 108 times, and then you can wear it. And you're supposed to do this prayer over the gem, take it off once a day for the next 45 days. And notice 4 and 5 is what? 9. Just like 1 and 8 is 9 at 108 per day. And it doesn't take very long. And it's very powerful. My son, who's going on 22 years old, he just got into a K2 dasha about a year ago. And his life has totally changed. It's like really shifted because he's in K2, just like yours has, Joe. And everybody, I was in a K2 dasha about 7-8 years ago, and they're powerful, man. I mean, your whole life, your whole reality shifts. And it's a blessing in disguise because K2 is the karmic control planet that shifts the, you could say, direction and flow of karma. See, all your planets are in between Ketu and Rahu, except for the Sun, Mercury, and Venus. See, your moon, your Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn are all on the back side of the Rahu-Ketu axis. They're very mysterious. And see, this really shifts the energy. And then when you hit 2030, you're going to jump into this air trine on the Venus Dasha. So if you do mantras and you wear the right gems, what it does is it vibrates your aura to the energy grasping you. They actually call planets graha in Vedic astrology, which means seizer or grasper of the aura. And it really is. They literally are portals to the auric field.
It's fascinating, man. This is why I love having you on the show, Jeff. This stuff is just profound to me, but unfortunately we ran out of time. But I hope that you guys, look, if you guys want to get an astrological, I mean, if you really want to know, like, you really want to explore your soul astrologically, Kabbalistically, all these things, I've been talking to Jeff. I would recommend Jeff. I know that you're doing good work, man. Like, speaking of, you talked all this stuff about me. I think you're doing some of the best work here on the planet, man, just to keep doing what you're doing. So thanks for coming on again.
Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you. Yeah. I like it because I help people, you know. I mean, I could do a lot of different things, but I've been roped back into this all my life. And I've always asked why. And then I look at my chart and I go, well, I'm supposed to help people. So not a bad thing. We don't take anything with us. If everyone learns, no matter what wealth you amass here, you'll never take it with you. But you do take the wealth of what you gained in consciousness and awareness of the soul. And that's the true riches. It really is.
Yeah, it definitely is. And you guys go to jeffharman.com. Jeff, can't wait to talk to you again, man. It was a good time. Thanks for coming on.
You bet, Joe. Good luck to you. And try doing that mantra. It's really, really cool.
I definitely will. I definitely will. All right, you guys, we'll see you tomorrow night with Ryan Gable. Good night, y'all. Sweet dreams.